First of all, thank you so much for coming out. We had an absolutely amazing turnout. For everyone watching the live stream who couldn't make it here today, I'm so sorry we've maxed out the capacity. We'll do a better job of letting you know ahead of time next time when we think that might happen. We were definitely surprised by the turnout. We had 460 RSVPs. This place holds 150 people. We're a little over that maybe. We're pretty much right on that right now. Before we get started, I do want to thank the space, obviously. I mean, we're really taxing the capacity, really taxing the limits. And Justin Hall from Digital Garage is here to say a few words. We just give a big round of applause. They're a huge part of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Travis. How many of you have traded curio cards? How many of you have heard of curio cards? Okay, well, two of your hosts here tonight are both working on a project on the blockchain called Curio Cards, so now you know. So my name's Justin Hall. I'm the community manager at DG717. This is DG717 here at 717 Market, and the DG stands for Digital Garage. How many of you have heard of that company? Oh, all right. We are known a little. So yes, our co-founder is Joey Ito. He's perhaps the most famous veteran of this enterprise. He's the director of the MIT Media Lab, and he comes here once a year to hold a conference. So we're going to have a conference in November called the New Context Conference. I want to put this on your radar for November 3rd, Friday, and November 4th. We're going to look at emerging technology issues, and we take a lot of inspiration from the hosts that host here. So if you're part of this community and you're doing great research or you're having great connections and you want to find a context to share them, you want to host them here, come talk to DG. We might be able to host you if you're a company or an individual working in this space and you want a co-working desk that you can come sit at that will make you feel connected to what's emerging in our technologies. Please come and visit again and find me if you can. I'm Justin at dg717.com. That's probably the easiest way to find me. So I am very grateful that Travis and Tom and the rest of the crew bring fascinating people like you to this space. You are the content. And along those lines, please enjoy the lightning talks, which the subsequent panel will have to live up to for entertainment value. Thank you.
And of course, all the food and drinks you've eaten tonight and are eating were supplied by our sponsors. Waxman PR, who, Derek, are you here? There he is right back there. If you will have any questions for Waxman PR. They are a PR firm. They sponsor a lot of really big Bitcoin companies you've probably heard of. And they are a PR firm out of Wall Street, and they're a long-term partner, and huge thanks to them. CoinSource is a Bitcoin ATM company. They have several ATMs in the city. They're all over the place. It's a really great way if you're new to Bitcoin, who here is new to Bitcoin, doesn't have any Bitcoin? Okay. Oh. All right, well, now you know how to get some if you want more, or there you go. Also in the back, we have a Coin Center today, and they're handing out some swag, some fun things, and they'll tell you also a lot more about Bitcoin as well. And lastly, of course, Dash. Dash has been a really big supporter of our community for a while now. We touch topics that range over the whole Bitcoin and blockchain ecosystem, and they've been really great supporters as well. And that's the sponsors. We're going to go ahead and jump into lightning talks. If you aren't familiar with those are, essentially somebody gets a minute, a little bit less, to come up and talk about their project. We've already signed those people up. I see people lining up. But it's a set list, so we don't run over on time. Terry's good. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So, first up, Christopher Allen. Please, a round of applause.
So my name's Christopher Allen. I'm probably best known as the co-author of the TLS protocol, the world's dominant security protocol. I've been involved in cryptography since the late 80s, and I'm very concerned about how we're using these technologies. A lot of the things that we have fought for the last 20 plus years is being challenged by the financial opportunities that we have today. We did this, we created these technologies. Go read the Bitcoin manifesto back there. We created them for a reason. So I've started this discussion community called Token Ethics. You can do that hashtag on Twitter. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see we basically had an event last month where we got a number of people together in a facilitated session. And in here we began to kind of articulate what are the ethics, sort of separate from the law, separate from the regulatory side of things. why are we doing this and how can we do it in an ethical fashion? So we had a really good dialogue, and the transcript is there, and tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. is a virtual salon. If you sign up at the subscription list at the bottom of the thing, I can send you an invite tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, I actually signed myself up. This is the project that Justin hinted at earlier. I'm doing this because we just launched our new website today. The project is called Curio Cards. I'm not going to take a lot of time. If you're curious, just come talk to me later. The short version is a platform for artists to sell their work digitally online, and we're really excited about creating something that's very useful and helpful for the art community. We did a Bitcoin art show last year, and this is kind of born out of what we learned from that. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey guys, my name is Avi. I'm from Purse. We're a Bitcoin marketplace. I want to tell you more, but we're here, myself and Amanda here, to recruit for user testers. Part of what we're testing are our new landing pages, so come find me or Amanda later. Leave us your name, phone number, email, and if you feel comfortable, your private keys too. We'll take that. In exchange for about 30, 45, 60 minutes of your time, we are looking to give you $20 worth of Bitcoin, preferably to your new Purse account. So come find myself or Amanda back there later. We're from Purse.io. By the way, don't go to the website. That's part of user testing. Thank you.
Next up, we have organizer for the San Francisco Ethereum Meetup Group, Matt.
Hey everybody, I run a meetup group called SF Ethereum. It's different from the developers meetup that will be here tomorrow. We have a much more general scope. If you're a developer that has been working on a project, maybe you want input from users, or if you're a business wanting to know about Ethereum, please come talk to me, or if you're just interested in the meetup. We are looking for sponsors, so if your company would like to be more involved in the Ethereum space, it's a great way to get started. Thanks everybody.
Alex. Oh, actually, Terry, want to go as well? Alex, you're up, yeah.
Hello guys, my name is Alex and we're working on virtual reality project that uses blockchain. The project is not announced yet, but we got a lot of materials and we are looking for a copywriter, technical writer, who will help us polish white paper, prospectus, one-pager, so we can present it to you. So if anyone feels capable of doing technical writing, we got cash, we got coins, we got equity, please come talk to me. Thank you.
All right, so I'd like to go ahead and welcome up our moderator for this evening, Thomas Hunt. He also knows Matt Bitcoins, runs the World Crypto Network. They're our sort of online partner, and we live stream all our content with them. Tom, welcome. Tom will introduce our panel.
All right, thanks, Travis. And come see me afterwards because I have lots of World Crypto Network stickers I could give you. Ooh, I got your stickers. But let's go ahead and bring out our panel. We're joined by 3 lawyers. It's way more than one. So we have Sarah Hody, and Reuben Bramanathan, and Lindsay. All right, so we want to start out just really basically, and since we're dealing with lawyers, I made sure to bring my paperwork, because you always have to have paper if you're going to talk to lawyers. So my first question is,
Could I get them in writing, please?
Huh? Sure, of course, triplicate. You have to put the little sign here's on it, or I don't know what to do. But first, what about Bitcoin? Just tell me really quickly, is Bitcoin a currency, a commodity, both, or neither? Lindsay, first.
So the CFTC has said that Bitcoin is a commodity, and it's subject to CFTC regulations. And the way that Bitcoin is used is similar to that of a currency. It's a medium of exchange, it's a store of value.
I think that was a great lawyer answer. She managed to get 2 of them in there. Okay, Reuben, you do better.
Thanks, Tom. Firstly, thanks for having us here. It's an honor to be talking to you all, especially with Mad Bitcoins himself as the moderator. So this is it's like a career goal for me, so I'm pretty pumped. And thanks for the easy question right up.
No flattering the witness, Your Honor, please.
So yeah, I think Lindsay's right. Like it's different things depending on who you ask and depending on which government agency you talk to, depending on which group of people you talk to. So the challenge is we've got something that's fundamentally different to anything we've seen before, and it's the same technology can do a bunch of things, right? Now the same technology is creating things like securities. So I think there's like 1,000,001 ways to answer that question.
A very good dodge. Sarah, can you do better?
I can certainly try. Also, just want to say thanks for having us here tonight, and thanks Digital Garage for hosting us. Yeah, I can maybe do one better on the dodging part of the answer, which is, if you want a technical answer to that question, you've got the wrong people on stage. But if you want to talk about what you're doing with Bitcoin, then I think you've got the right people up here to talk about how this technology can be used like a currency, or can be used like a security, or like a commodity, depending on the use case. And as lawyers, we're trained to take new sets of facts and run them through existing laws. And so the way I see it, this is just a new set of facts.
An answer worthy of an economist. So let's move on to the next question, which should be really easy. Is Bitcoin legal? Sarah, start with you.
I think the answer to that question goes back to what I just said. It depends what you're using it for. So you can do lots of illegal things with Bitcoin, and you can do lots of legal things with Bitcoin. At a technical level, I don't think there's anything, or I don't know of any governments that have said Bitcoin as a technology is illegal or unlawful to use.
We were getting close with Russia and Vietnam, but they've changed their tone recently. They're actually on board, at least with the blockchain.
Yeah, now they're super excited about it.
Yeah. As soon as they figured out they could make their own copy, they all got on board, I think. Okay, Reuben, is Bitcoin legal?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I think it's the kind of question like, is the internet legal? And you're going to get a bunch of different answers depending on what you do on the internet. I think it's the same kind of challenge for people using Bitcoin and using all different types of blockchains.
All right, and then Lindsay, is Bitcoin legal?
So I think to think about this question, you have to think about what does it mean for a cryptocurrency to be legal. Can you use it to pay taxes? Can you use it to send payments day to day? And for most purposes, the US government hasn't said, oh, you can't use Bitcoin to transact. Maybe you can't use Bitcoin to pay taxes or to interface with the government, but there aren't restrictions on private transactions regarding Bitcoin unless they're inherently illegal.
All right, and I think that goes well into my next question, which, if you hold Bitcoin, do you have to pay taxes? And you referred to it a little bit, that if I tried to pay my taxes in Bitcoin, would the government accept them?
So I don't think right now the IRS will accept Bitcoin tax payments.
You can only give unto Caesar with what is Caesar's, right?
Yes, and also I think most people here would like to hodl their Bitcoin. So
what if they
it's
hold
not
them
an
for
idea.
a year? Is there like a long-term way of getting out of taxes, or is it only short-term that I'd have to pay taxes?
Well, you would have to pay taxes when there's a transaction with Bitcoin, and that's when you realize capital gains taxes, or if you receive good Bitcoin in terms of payment. I know some companies will give their employees Bitcoin for salary. So you have to pay taxes in these incidences, but just holding them and having it appreciate in value, I don't think triggers any tax obligations.
All right.
Yeah, that's right. I think that there's a bunch of interesting things going on right now. I mean, speaking as part of Coinbase, we have the whole IRS thing that's been going on for some time now. Part of our resistance to the IRS getting customer records is that, for us, financial privacy is important and the privacy of our users is important. So what we need to see is some actual new laws that make sense for cryptocurrencies and taxation. We don't want to see capital gains tax every time you buy a coffee. Those sorts of things don't make sense. And we don't want to see the IRS demanding personal data that they don't really need to get tax records. So I think as the space evolves, we're going to see some more we hope to see some more sensible taxation of cryptocurrencies.
Now, Coinbase is an interesting example. So what if I move my Bitcoin from one wallet to another wallet? Does that count as sending or selling my Bitcoin? What if I move them out of Coinbase into another company? Do I have to pay taxes right away, or how can you tell the difference if I'm moving my funds around?
Yeah, so I'll answer this. It's actually something that as an outsider I found most frustrating about the Coinbase IRS situation, which is that asking Coinbase to report on that, we run into the problem posed by your question right here, which is that Coinbase has no idea if I'm sending my Bitcoin to my blockchain.info wallet. Coinbase has no idea that I'm sending it to my wallet. To them, that looks like a taxable event, and so anything that they report to the IRS would make that look like a taxable event. So there's actually no real solution or records that Coinbase could give the IRS that would actually show them what is a taxable event, because at the core of the question you asked, which was, is it a taxable event for me to send from one of my wallets to the other? The answer is no. It's a taxable event when you dispose of property, and you're not disposing of property when you're just putting it in one wallet to the next.
But what if my Bitcoins were hacked or stolen, or I sent them to the wrong address?
Well, what is the...
Do I have to pay taxes then? Uh-oh, that's going to be a problem. We're going to have to work on that one later.
It's like your really expensive art collection that just got destroyed in a fire.
It was some kind of fire. It was Betsy's cow or something. Some kind of... Yeah, what about Bcash? What if they give me free money? What do I do then?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, what's your cost basis of Bcash? You didn't pay anything for it, but you paid for Bitcoin at some point, whether you mined it or you bought it, and then you got this free thing. So yeah, these are like some great examples of how hard it is for the existing tax laws to fit in this new space.
Because right now the idea is I'd have to take a spreadsheet out and say when I bought all the Bitcoin and when I got the Bcash and if I sold it and if I sent it somewhere. And it seems like a lot of work. I mean, I want to pay my taxes and do the right thing, and support the government and everything. But yeah, I don't want to do that much work. I'm not going to become an accountant just to support the government. That's too much work. I could become a lion tamer. That'd be way more fun. But what about altcoins? We mentioned Bcash. What about other copies of Bitcoin, like Litecoin and Ethereum? Are they legal? Are they commodities or currencies or what? Start with Sarah.
Are they legal or illegal? I think the answer goes back again to what are you using it for? There are lots of completely lawful uses that you can own and hold and transact with, and there are plenty of things I'm sure that you can do with any given altcoin that are not lawful. So again, it comes back to what are you doing with it?
And what about privacy altcoins like Monero and Dash that don't leave behind a record? How are we going to handle those? Let's start with Lindsay.
So, I mean, the people use the internet to commit crime, and they could similarly use Monero or Zcash to commit crime, but you wouldn't get rid of the internet just to prevent crime.
You might.
You might limit the internet. So I think unless Zcash and Monero become the predominant usage of those two cryptos are to commit crime, I think the government might have more regulatory scrutiny, but I don't think they would ban it necessarily.
Now, in China, they built a great firewall to keep all the bad traffic out. Could we build a firewall around Monero and Dash?
I think those privacy-focused cryptos are super interesting and really important, right? And it comes back to what your needs are, right? So if you're a person who wants financial privacy, then you want to use these cryptos. If you're someone like maybe a larger, more regulated institution that you don't want to be seen with these cryptos, then you might not want to use them. But it comes back to choice.
Now, my friend Tone has an idea that the government thinks that we're all tax cheats, and that's why they want to get rid of cash. Because whenever you spend cash, we have no idea what you bought, we have no idea how much cash you have. Is this a problem for these privacy altcoins, Sarah?
I suppose it could be, but again, that goes back to what will the future of tax reporting look like for cryptocurrencies, digital currencies, tokens, however you want to categorize them. I think it becomes a similar reporting problem as we have today in restaurants. If nothing changes about how Bitcoin and token coins are generally taxed, then I think you end up with the same problem as you have from cash-based transactions today. But I don't think that that's a reason that the IRS would come in and say, well, we need to shut it down. for the same reason that cash still exists.
For now.
There's a great organization called Coin Center. I'll give them a little shout out. They're working hard to make sure that we all get to keep working on the cool projects that we're working on. So hopefully forever.
It's pretty cool, but I think they're based in New York. What about New York and the BIT license? Should we have 50 laws in 50 states regulating Bitcoin? Is that the future we're going to see soon? Obviously lots of fees. Oh, Reuben doesn't want to answer that one. Coinbase is still working on their licenses, no doubt.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with licensing. It's a hard question to answer because I'll tell you firsthand, it's a major pain in the ass. Like, it is pretty obnoxious to have to look at every single state and figure out what the laws are. And it's not just for, depending on what you're working on, it's not just for money transmission. It becomes a question in securities laws as well, and depending on what your transactions are, there are different state taxes. So all of the things that we're kind of talking about and dancing around at a federal level can be questions at a state level. Do I see it going away anytime soon? Probably not in the short term. I think maybe we're seeing things like the OCC charter, and we're seeing things like states trying to work together to bring more uniform regulation. And so maybe in the mid to long-term future, we'll get more synthesis. Is that necessarily a bad thing? I think, on the whole, it would be great if it changed tomorrow and it was easier for everyone. But at the same time, I think the US is where a lot of the innovation is happening, and we're all in this room right now. So maybe it's not the best world scenario, but it is still a pretty decent bet for innovation.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, right? Even in spite of this, we see a lot of innovation in the US. But this, like, the bit license thing is not fundamentally a Bitcoin problem, it's a US problem, right? 50 states, different regulations, each competing for their own piece of the pie. Works in some cases, doesn't work in others. In the EU, for example, you've got one license, and you can service 32, 34 countries. I'm from Australia originally, which is why I sound like this. And we have one license there as well. So, like, this is kind of the US getting its act together and keeping the innovation here.
Yeah, to add to that, I think one development that we should focus on is probably state reciprocity. So we should sort of lobby for the regulatory approval that if you have a license in one state, maybe you can have another state reciprocate, so you don't have to redundantly apply for licenses in every single state. And thinking more globally, I know Switzerland and Singapore, they have fintech reciprocity agreement where a company in Switzerland can operate in Singapore without having to repeat the entire regulatory process. And so hopefully, on a global level, we will also have harmonization of regulatory standards.
So it would be like a marriage license. We don't have to get remarried if we move to a new state. It works in all the states. You just have to fill out your paperwork at least once to get on the board, right?
Precisely, yes.
All right, well, you mentioned investments, so let's move slowly into investments. What's an IPO? What's an initial public offering? Anyone want the easy question? Okay, Sarah, what's an IPO?
Sure. An initial public offering is a specific type of set of filings and offerings that you submit to the SEC when you want to be able to sell investment contracts or shares of your company to just anyone who's willing to buy.
And you have to fill out a bunch of forms, and they issue stock, and we go to the stock market, and we ring the bell. A whole bunch of stuff happens, right? It's important. You have to ring the bell, otherwise it's not legit. Okay, so Reuben, what's an ICO, an initial coin offering, or an initial token offering?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So, unlike an IPO, even though they kind of sound the same, IPO is a very structured, regulated, well-understood process about taking a private company public, and you've got to fill out a bunch of forms, you've got to demonstrate you've got a business that's solvent, you've got assets, you've got all the structures in place.
More paperwork, more lawyers, right. Accountants, everybody gets a piece.
And no one IPOs on day one of their company, right? An ICO, of course, as I'm sure many people in this room already know, is, I would say it's a sale of a digital token on a blockchain that represents some set of rights, and you can sell it to anyone in the world. And it's automated through a smart contract sale.
Now, some of these ICOs have raised $50 or $100 million. This is like giving a restaurant all 10 years of your profits in advance. Lindsay, do you think this is a good idea?
Well, I mean, this is not a question for a lawyer necessarily, but from an economic standpoint, it might be a good idea, it might be a bad idea. It might be a good idea in that it provides the initial capital to do very grandiose projects, and a lot of startups might have issues getting funding for very large-scale, high barrier to entry projects. And so this gives them the capital to fund development, and it gives them perhaps even the long-term perspective to invest their money in long-term projects instead of investing in short-term projects to appease venture capitalists. From the downsides to having all this money is you have to know how to spend this money wisely. Maybe you shouldn't keep all your corporate treasury in Ethereum and Bitcoin, which tend to fluctuate quite significantly. And it's just, you attract regulatory attention.
All right, and what if an ICO raised $100 or $150 million? They're going to do something big like the Hyperloop or a trip to Mars, or maybe they're going to build a smart lock company called Slockit. Is that a good idea to give those people so much money in advance without all the paperwork, without ringing the bell, without the accountants and the lawyers? Does that sound like a good idea, Reuben?
Oh, I got some thoughts on this one.
All right.
So yeah, I think fundamentally an ICO should be a way of raising money for a new protocol or application, right? If you want to create something that's a new distributed network and you want to have the initial owners of that network or the participants have some skin in the game, then yeah, that makes sense, right? You need to have a decentralized network, you need to have a bunch of different participants, whether they're holding tokens or coins or whatever. If you were just trying to raise money for a traditional enterprise, then why haven't you got a company? Why are you raising VC money or IPOing? I think what we're getting caught up in is this hype that an ICO is good for raising money for anything, and that can't be true.
Now, what about the Howey test? I've heard that if you watch more than an hour of Howie Mandel comedy and you can stand it, you get to be an ICO. Sarah, is that the Howey test?
I'd like to say I wish, but I'm really terrible with movies and TV shows, so I'm actually not sure.
It's an old reference. I could, talk about the glove on his head and so forth.
But no, so the Howey test comes from an old lawsuit where it actually involved an orange grove in Florida. It had nothing to do with company shares, as you might imagine them. But what we got out of that was a test that says if you make an investment of money into a common enterprise where you have an expectation of profits solely from someone else's efforts and someone else's work, then those four characteristics make whatever it is that you just gave money to an investment contract. And according to the SEC, an investment contract is a security. So if you are offering it for sale, available to the public, just like when you do an IPO, when you're offering your company shares for sale and making them available to the general public, then you have lots of paperwork and bells to ding and whistles to blow and lots of lawyers to pay.
Now, what if I was going to start my company, but my token had utility value? So I was going to do a pre-sale of PlayStation 5s, and I printed, 1,000 PlayStation 5 tokens, and I have about 100 PlayStation 5s, so I think I'll be fine. Is that okay to pre-sale a token that's just a utility?
Utility is the magic word, but the facts pattern you just gave is a little different. So the pre-sale can get into a number of different problems, largely because if you're not actually able to deliver the thing yet, then that becomes either if it has utility and that therefore it's a commodity, then the pre-sale of it might become an advanced sale of a commodity that the CFTC cares about. Or there are ways to construct it where it can still look like a security. So it's a very fact-dependent question. But the real value in utility is that when you issue a token, the reason you hear the utility buzzword from lawyers everywhere is that there's sort of these two goalposts that you're trying to hit between when you're issuing a token. If you're trying to avoid being under SEC regulation on one hand, The other thing you have to watch out for is FinCEN and money transmission and becoming an administrator of a virtual currency. And the funny thing is, the further you get away from something being a security, often the more it starts to look like a virtual currency. The further you get away from something being a virtual currency, the more it starts to look like a security. But the kind of silver bullet that makes you hit right through the middle on both of those is if the token actually has a purpose and has utility. And in that scenario, you're able to both fail the Hody test, which in the token world is a good thing, and you're able to have a token that is not a virtual currency. The sale of a commodity is not the sale of a virtual currency under FinCEN, such that money transmission AML laws would come into effect.
Okay.
Yeah, so just to add to that, I think we'd all like to, we all hope that the SEC will come out and say, look, if your token's got utility and you're selling it because the people are buying it to use the thing that you're building, then it's not a security. Like, that's where we think makes the most sense for this space to go. But we don't know that's going to be the case. All we know is that the SEC has said the DAO was a security, those tokens were securities. They really look like people investing in some sort of venture fund. You know, you supposedly was distributed and autonomous, and it really just enabled people to buy in and expect the value of the thing to go up, right? So that's at one end of the spectrum, and then maybe at the other end is this kind of utility token that does X, that gives you decentralized storage space or processing power or prediction markets, who knows what it is, right? So the theory is that these things should be less like securities, but no one can say that for sure, not right now.
Right. To add to that, unless the SEC comes out and gives on-point guidance, no one can make the umbrella statement that utility tokens are not securities. And beyond the SEC, beyond the Hody test, there are other tests for securities. There's the Reeves-Gamley resemblance test, and each of the 50 states has their own security regime. So even if the SEC says, oh, this is not a security, maybe California will say that it is a security. So California and some other states actually have this other test called the risk capital test, where it looks at the riskiness of the venture that's being invested in, amongst other things. And in using that test, California Supreme Court has actually said club memberships could be a security. So I think it's important to have a very wide analysis of each jurisdiction that the ICO plans to issue tokens in.
All right, so you mentioned the CFTC and that they said Bitcoin's a commodity. Now I know Donald Trump's going to drain the swamp, and part of draining the swamp means not even stocking all the offices at the State Department or maybe even the SEC, but still, somehow the SEC found time to warn us about the DAO, but they didn't take any action because all the funds were returned. Do you think that this was a good warning? Is it going to have the appropriate effect on the market? Let's start with Sarah.
I think it was a good warning because I think that what the SEC did was not, what they said was not a surprise to anyone who's paying attention. None of the lawyers that I've spoken to read it and thought, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Can you believe they came to that conclusion? Anyone who had looked at it and had looked at the Hody test would have said, yeah, the DAO looks like a security. And so I actually think the SEC sort of picked an easy target and said, hey, let's talk about a token that is a pretty obvious security and let everyone know we're paying attention. So don't go crazy, go talk to a lawyer. But we're also not going to take an aggressive stance that says every token out there is definitely a security. So overall, I think it is good because I do think that it leaves room for there to be tokens that are not securities.
Don't you think part of the problem with the DAO is that they forked Ethereum and they gave everyone their money back, so there were no losers, there were no harms for the SEC to go after? If a future token goes down and people lose 50, 100, $500 million, will the SEC step in and shut these people down and go after them? Do you think that's a possibility? Let's start with Reuben.
Yeah, I think that's a distinct possibility. I think the next one that totally collapses in a screaming heap or is a straight out scam, which there are a few candidates out there right now, I think that they're
Make sure to give us the names of those after. We need a little list to stay away from.
right, I think those projects are in for a rude awakening at some point. And the SEC, I think, you know, it wasn't just that the funds were returned. It was kind of like, okay, this is the first one. You know, it's a warning shot, right? That doesn't mean that they couldn't have done it just because the funds were returned. It's still
a crime, right? If I rob a bank but I give the money back, oh, it's fine now.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem right. All right, Lindsay, do you agree the SEC did the right thing?
Yeah, I think this was a pretty clear signal to the public that the SEC is looking at this space. And I guess the SEC released this investigative report about a year after the actual incident, which is actually quite a slow reaction time. I think what will be interesting beyond SEC action, which has been proven to be a little bit slow, is private investors suing the token issuers. So if you have an unregistered security, you might be subject to lawsuits from your investors. So I think we're going to see a lot of private action because the SEC is pretty busy.
Do they have to lose money to sue, or can they make money and sue anyway?
I think they could make money and sue anyway.
That's America. All right, but that was only the SEC's first warning, because just yesterday, they warned again about ICOs, saying that if an existing company starts making claims that they're going to do an ICO or a token, you should be extra careful. And they even delisted this company called First Bitcoin Capital that had a 6,000% rise on the stock market after flirting with the idea that they were going to start their own ICO. Will this second warning work? Will the market understand and the irrational exuberance go away and be replaced by professionals and lawyers? Let's go to Reuben.
So yeah, this one was kind of interesting because it wasn't a comment specifically about ICOs. It was about the effect of the ICO hype on regular company stock prices. And it's kind of crazy that this company could have this crazy increase in price just by stirring up some ICO hype. But I think it just goes to show like how hot the space is right now. And even if you're looking at a traditional company, that company can sort of create this expectation that they're doing something that they're not just by using these terms. But it comes back to what I was getting at earlier. Like, if you're that company and you exist and you can raise money through your stockholders or through the markets, why are you doing an ICO? It just like there's something wrong there.
All right, and let's talk about a specific instance here, because Bitfinex happened to receive a letter from the SEC. It was written on July the 25th and posted on August 11th and was quickly taken down. But of course, this is the internet, and the internet never forgets. So I have a copy of the letter right here. And it cites the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 and discusses the DAO and the potential limited liabilities for selling DAO tokens. It also talks specifically about Bitfinex in here because they were part of selling DAO tokens. Could the exchanges be at risk for selling these altcoins and ICOs? Lindsay?
So if a cryptocurrency exchange sells tokens that are later categorized as securities, then they have to probably undergo all the requirements of a securities exchange, unless they have an exemption. So that's actually what a lot of cryptocurrency exchanges do not want. And because they would like to avoid all this complexity, I think in the future we will see exchanges, at least US exchanges, delist some tokens that might be considered securities.
And that is what Bitfinex started doing immediately. They started delisting tokens and delisting coins and really cleaning up their operation. Then a few weeks later, they said they wanted to cut off all US customers, and you've got 90 days to get your funds out. Is that something that could happen here?
Here as in?
The US?
The US. Yeah, we could have, well, Bitfinex didn't have a very substantial US base. So I don't think we're going to see like Kraken and GDAX doing the same thing. It's more likely that they would even like comply with the securities regulations. So is that?
Do you think the other exchanges will delist their coins as well? Isn't Coinbase has a couple of coins on there that aren't Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin, and maybe more soon? Are they going to have to delist all of these?
Yeah, so what was interesting about the SEC DAO report is that they talked about both Bitcoin and Ethereum as currencies and not as securities. That doesn't mean that they can't also be securities, but it just indicates that the SEC is not thinking about Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin as securities because they're really more like currencies. Having said that, like that's why Coinbase and GDEX have been very conservative with the digital assets and currencies that we add. We really think about what we want to add, not just from a what's hot right now perspective, but what's going to have long-term value, what do our customers demand, security, regulatory implications, and that's why you've seen us being a little more slow than some other exchanges.
All right, and Sarah, do you think there'll be any Bitcoin exchanges left in the US, or will they all flee?
I don't think GDEX has any intention to leave. In fact, I'm pretty sure they're opening another office on the other side of the country. So I'm a little bit biased, but I
nice
think
if they could get some new servers with that new office, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll let Reuben answer that one. But yeah, I think we'll continue to see exchanges in the U.S. Again, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, which is as annoying as it is to have to deal with U.S. regulations. A ton of innovation is happening despite that, and I think that will only continue. And so where there's demand, there will be companies who figure out a way to navigate it and figure out a way to offer those services to customers. Will there continue to be exchanges in the U.S. that are offering arguably tokens that are securities? Maybe not, or maybe you'll end up seeing, actual institutional exchanges listing them at some point in the future. But yeah, I don't think the exchanges are going anywhere.
It sounds like I'm going to have to start using a VPN. But Reuben, do you think there's a chance that the exchanges will not go out of business, but maybe just limit their traffic to high-value individuals, something like the, I forget what it's called, the approved investors or the regulated investors?
Yeah, I don't think that limiting to accredited investors is a really good thing for exchanges to do. I mean, part of the whole reason that businesses exist in cryptocurrency is because, I mean, at least at Coinbase, we buy into this vision of this open financial network for the world. So we don't want just to limit it to rich people, right? We want everyone.
It seems so much simpler. It's a shorter list. They have more money.
Right. But yeah, we want everyone who wants to buy crypto to be able to buy crypto, and that's part of our mission. So we have no intention to limit access to accredited investors.
Now, what about an exchange like Local Bitcoins, where I go to a coffee shop or maybe a bank, and I meet somebody and I give them $100 and they give me some Bitcoin? Is that going to exist in the future?
I think you can't prevent those transactions from happening. So these small over-the-counter transactions, I don't think the government will take substantial action against them. And I think extrapolating from that, I think there's an opportunity maybe for decentralized exchanges to become more popular in this space, because decentralized exchanges, they could argue that they mainly provide the technical infrastructure for peer-to-peer transactions. And in this way, maybe they could even help users trade securities. But I'm not sure. This is just a curiosity.
I think I've heard of that defense. Is that the crack house defense, where I just happen to have a crack house and people just happen to buy crack there, and I just own the house? That's going to work.
I'll touch that one with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah, that would happen to Ross Ulbricht. They said that he was running a crack house and it had all these compartments specially designed for smuggling, and that's why he couldn't use the same common carrier defense for the Silk Road that people are now trying to extend to the exchanges.
Right, so what's interesting about new decentralized exchange protocols is that they don't require anyone central, like Silk Road, right?
So no Dread Pirate Roberts.
Right, so this is just a way, like these protocols are just ways of exchanging information, and the information can be, digital assets. Then we have new protocols like 0x, maybe Lightning, that can actually truly decentralize exchange, and that's pretty exciting, right?
So Sarah, what is a decentralized exchange? Is it kind of like BitTorrent, like I'd run a client on my computer and now I'm a part of the exchange? Do I get sued for running a client on my computer and being part of this decentralized exchange? It sounds really dangerous.
I mean, In theory, you could, yeah. So the activity that is regulated by FinCEN, at least, if we're talking about money transmission, is for exchanging, at least, it's buying or selling digital currency in exchange for other digital currency or real currency. And you don't have to be doing it you don't have to be Coinbase or GDAX to be construed as being engaged in that activity. So is it possible that you could still be construed as partaking in unregistered or unlicensed money transmission? Yes, but this goes actually, I think, to a point that's worth making with why the SEC didn't investigate or pursue any enforcement action with the DAO, which is that there's a little bit of an enforcement headache involved. And so when you're talking about enforcing individual users of a decentralized protocol, I don't really think FinCEN wants to waste their time doing that unless you start to amass a really suspicious number of questionable transactions. How they track that is another interesting question. But on top of that, I think related to the SEC and the DAO investigation, I think part of why we didn't see any investigative or any enforcement action come out of that is a jurisdictional question of, well, they're in Switzerland and we're saying, yeah, we could long-arm statute, but
it's too far. We can't send airplanes to Switzerland?
They can send airplanes, but they can't send our police officers. So, there's a little bit of a question of, is this worth the headache of all the things that we could go after, and what are our policy goals for things like preventing money laundering and preventing unlicensed securities, people losing their money from scam investment schemes. They want to go after the people who are actually the bad guys in those spaces.
All right, so what about the Lightning Network, the legendary layer 2 Bitcoin solution where I would have 20 bucks from Bitcoin, I'd send it to Lightning, then maybe I'd send $3 to Sarah to buy coffee, but I'd send it to Lindsay, who'd send it to Reuben, who'd send it to Sarah. Does that mean that all those people are now money transmitters? Are they exchanges now in the Lightning model?
So I think one really interesting thing about that question is, like, how do we make sure that doesn't happen, right? Because that's going to stymie all this innovation. And I think the challenge is kind of getting some definitions around what should be regulated and what shouldn't. And that's kind of some of the work that CoinCenter's been doing. And one of the things they've been working on is, if you don't control someone else's funds, then you shouldn't be a money transmitter. Like, that's simplifying it a little, right? Like, if my funds are locked up in a Lightning channel and no one else can, take them because of the way the channel works, then why should anyone else be considered to be a money transmitter, right? I'm still in control of my funds, and once the channel closes, it's all settled. So, like, these are some of the examples of things we need to resist being regulated inappropriately.
But you got paid, and one of the first things they taught me is I need to follow the money. So what if we try to go after you for all those pennies that you got for Lightning?
Yeah, again, I think this is the kind of thing that if there's not sensible regulation, then this is a big problem. So it's something worth fighting for.
All right, I've asked all the hard questions I have, but fortunately I have a whole audience of people to ask even harder questions. So if everybody could raise your hand, only really hard questions, and Travis is going to get a microphone and he'll come around. Now I have more microphones than the lawyers.
Hi, I am an old school economics person.
All right.
And to me, money has two characteristics. One is the exchange characteristics, one is the credit characteristics. The exchange is that, like, you and I both accept exchange. Credit means that if I buy a coffee for $5, I give you 10, you give me $5 back. So my question to you is, what is the Bitcoin, all these cryptocurrencies have to do with credit characteristics of money? I don't think they are not a credit aspect of money. Now, you're hearing from someone who attended a Yahoo chat room in 2006, and somebody said in the chat room, why don't we send money through packet networks? So I've been involved with this since 2006, but I still don't understand this.
All right, let's ask the panel. Credit?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing about Bitcoin is that it's like the base layer of the stack, right? So you can build on top of that similar things to what we have in existing finance, right? You can build borrowing, lending, securitizing, whatever on top of it, just the same way that banks currently do that, except the difference is that banks don't own the whole layer, the whole stack, right? You have this fundamentally decentralized base layer, which allows permissionless innovation by anyone who wants to build these functions.
So I agree. That means that it's a great exchange medium. It shouldn't have a value of its own. Just like the paper on $100 bill doesn't have a value of its own. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so and to that I'll say I think a lot of people also use money though as a store of value, and especially dollars and euros and some of the what are considered to be the more stable currencies. And so I think in that sense it's maybe more than just a mechanism of exchange, because it can also be a store of value. Not to discredit the notion that credit is maybe unnecessary, where you can send the exact transaction you want to be able to send, but it does have the feature or characteristic of being a store of value as well.
And interestingly enough, when you actually send Bitcoin, it sends all the money in your wallet and then sends you back the change, just the way it works technically. So that's an interesting feature. We have the next question.
Hi, yes. So as an entrepreneur potentially interested in doing a crowd sale, one of the main rationale for doing an ICO crowd sale is you can really have very low to no legal costs, at least previously. So if you're seeking legal counsel now to investigate doing a crowd sale, I'm trying to figure out if it makes sense to sort of pay $600,000 for a TMT big law lawyer versus a lawyer who doesn't work exactly in that space, but maybe does private placements, that type of security law. Because right now it doesn't seem like any lawyer really knows the answer, because there's no case law regarding what is and what is not a marketable security. So, as an entrepreneur trying to minimize costs, what would you recommend? I mean, is it possible to go with, a lawyer that's, not going to charge you $600,000?
Well, Perkins Coie, we're not quoting people that high, so
I've heard 200
I'll start with there. I think I'm biased, of course, right? So you're going to get a little bit of a biased answer, but I'll tell you why I think it's important to go with a lawyer who knows the space and knows what they're talking about. Not that means you have to hire one of the big names. If you find another lawyer who will charge you less, who has lots of knowledge, then that's great. But you can go to jail for securities violations, and you can go to jail for money transmission violations. That was actually one of the bigger pieces of news that came out the week that the SEC released it, was a FinCEN enforcement against BTCE, and that actually had tons of criminal indictment and really bad penalties involved. And so you don't want to get these things wrong. And if you're talking about raising a bunch of money, then pay lawyers who will help you do it as right as you can possibly do it. On the costs, I'll say that something that happens with what, a lot of the clients I've worked with, it's actually maybe more than you're going to pay in taxes. For tax advice, because the outcome of not being a security and not being a currency is that you are a commodity. And so if you sell, $40, $100 million worth of tokens, the IRS is going to ask for close to half of that next year, because you just sold a product and that's all income to you. So actually a big piece of the fees that I think you can end up paying when you're getting started and doing a token sale is for appropriate tax advice. And so, I think when you hear high fees, that's maybe a combination of legal and tax fees.
And of course, caveat emptor, you always get what you paid for. You might have to go to Switzerland. You have questions?
So prior to 2009, there was a large amount of virtual currencies. Linden Labs was doing over $500 million worth of game currency exchanges. You could exchange your EverQuest Platinum for your Star Wars Stellar credits or whatever. Are there any lessons from the early innovations of virtual currencies that we're forgetting?
I think an interesting thing to focus on is the differences there, right? So all of those things were virtual currencies, but they're centralized, like Linden Dollars, Liberty Reserve, all these things are controlled by one central party. And the risk to the people who are using these is that that central party gets shut down, goes out of business, does an exit scam, right? Any of these things.
But isn't that true for an ICO?
Well, I mean, it depends, right? If you're issuing an ERC20 token, then in theory, you don't control the network.
Yeah, but Bitcoin is controlled by 4 minutes, so it's more centralized than US dollar.
Right, so you've got some centralization concerns
It's not some,
generally.
it's totally centralized.
Right, so but the purpose of a decentralized currency is that you can't be exit scammed because there's no one person in control. So the risk, the legal risk is different there.
So for something like e-gold, which was a centralized form of gold, is the main problem that it's centralized, or is it the problem they set up in another country and didn't fill out all the paperwork?
I mean, it's the same kind of thing, right? You've got one central party who is breaching the law somewhere and risks getting shut down.
So everyone else should lose their money? All the investors who had e-gold and then suddenly had nothing?
Yeah, I'm not saying it's a good thing.
But, so, I mean, just, I want to be a little sharper on this. So, how many ICOs currently deployed or going to be deployed are not centralized, where if the company goes away and they can't offer their drive chain, they can't offer their proof tokens, or whatever their service is, then the token has no fundamental value. It was purely pump and dump. Doesn't that imply that their centrality and thus they have the same kind of obligations and non-obligations that any other central provider does?
I think it's a little different, right? Because what you're saying is that the risk there is that the value of the thing doesn't appreciate because the usefulness of the network never gets to where people want it to be. But the thing itself, right, can't be destroyed or unissued. That's the whole point of the tokens. So I get what you're saying, but I think it's still a slightly different risk.
All right, Travis, we have another question in the back.
You mentioned before that utility tokens might be measured differently. Is there any estimate for what constitutes a minimum viable utility network?
What do you mean by minimum viability utility network?
So, for example, Blockmason recently put out a report that specified, the main reason why the SEC came down so hard on DAO is that the expectation for return was really dependent on managerial efforts and curatorial efforts of people who are putting the offers forward. And their defense was that their network was in a beta stage, and that you're effectively buying a portion of the network bandwidth or computation power. And so therefore, your expectation of return was dependent on your ability to create something on top of the platform. Because the platform was at a beta stage and the network existed in some form, they were exempt from the SEC filing process. So my question is, you have an ICO. That ICO represents the sale of utility tokens. The utility of that token is not very functional right now, but maybe it will be. So my question is, what is the minimum viable, like, if the token offers you utility, is it a utility token? Or is it dependent on the promise of what that utility will eventually become that is the measure?
So I would like to plug Coinbase issued a really good framework for judging the risk of whether some token will be considered a security. It's called the Securities Law Framework, right? Yeah, you should go home and Google that, Coinbase Securities Law Framework. And in it, one of the metrics is if the token doesn't have utility currently, then it's at higher risk of being a security. And a token that might have future utility use, significant utility use, but doesn't right now, might be a security until it does have that utility use. So I think that's one thing, but also I think the SEC and courts will look at what exactly is the utility. Like, we could attach a trivial utility to any token. The token could be an equity, but it allows you to redeem it for like an internet picture. I don't know. So as Reuben said before, I think one of the safer categories of tokens are prototype tokens that require the blockchain. If not for the blockchain and if not for the tokenization, the business would just not exist.
Yeah, to answer it a little more directly, I think that there's a lot of things that we are thinking about that should mean these things are utility tokens, but no one in the world can tell you right now that this token is or is not a security. There's just not enough clarity right now.
All right, do we have another question in the back?
Hello. Here in the US, is there any standards that the SCE or any government agency provides about know your customer policies for Bitcoin wallets?
So I think if I understand the question correctly, you're asking, is there an agency that requires KYC? Sorry, I misheard. Okay. Yeah, so that's FinCEN, and it's the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. And what they said is that if you are an administrator or an exchanger of a virtual currency, then you need to be registered with FinCEN as a money transmitter, which FinCEN regulates a list of different types of money services businesses, but money transmitters are one of them. And so they said if you are engaging in any of those activities, then you have to implement the same kinds of know your customer and anti-money laundering onboarding procedures that any bank or company like PayPal or Square Cash or Facebook payments, even for that matter, would impose.
A quick question about Cloudcoin. Since they actually did a security, is that money then taxable, or will it be when they distribute the tokens?
It's a good question. I'm not sure about the exact tax treatment there. I think what's interesting about Cloudcoin is that they probably, being a utility token, have a decent argument that that shouldn't be a security. But for a bunch of reasons, they decided to do a more conservative approach. I think the challenge for all of us in this space is how do we make sure that we can do token sales and do ICOs for things that are really good, valuable, useful protocol tokens without having to do this, without having to limit it to accredited investors. Because the whole point is to seed the network with a diverse range of participants that don't have that wealth requirement.
But isn't the reason why it was a security is because it was the SAP? So it was an agreement for future tokens because it doesn't exist right now. So then there's no utility if you buy right now, right?
So the reason they did that was so they could do the accredited investor-only offering and comply with the securities law. I mean, the other way to do it is to make sure your token is not a security, which, as we've talked about, is really hard to do right now. So that's kind of the bridge to where we want to be.
Yeah, I've heard one thing that the reason why it might have been was if they release them after a year, they could run into the long-term capital gains tax rate instead.
Yeah, there might be a bunch of different motivations.
Okay, one thing I haven't really heard much talked about. So if the golden bullet for ICOs is to be classified as a commodity, wouldn't the company then be selling them the, possibly regulated under auctioneering laws, potentially?
So you mean like CFTC jurisdiction? Is that what you're...
even state-by-state auctioneering laws.
Right, yeah, and they also exist at a state level. Yeah, so that is a problem if you're doing sort of this, or it can be if you're doing this sort of pre-sale, especially because of the delivery question. But usually if you are delivering the good, and so what is usually regulated are things like swaps and futures and forward contracts. And so if it's a crowd sale and I'm actually getting the token within a set number of days, then that type of commodity transaction is not something that CFTC at least looks at. Is there still a risk that, and should you maybe do a 50-state analysis, you could still run into problems there, but generally everything under the sun could be defined as a commodity, and so it's only certain types of commodity transactions that those types of regulators look at and care about.
So another follow-up question past that, though, especially in light of the recent SEC investor report, is there really any way to prove that the company that's doing the ICO is not also participating in the ICO and throwing their own money into the pile and pump and dumping?
Great question.
Yeah, great question.
Buyer beware.
question regarding, so what if you do ICO and then you've sold your tokens and then you get acquired by, let's say, Google, and Google decides to shut down your company? What happens then to your tokens as an investor?
Yeah, so that's interesting. What are the exit options available for a company that has ICO'd? And I think a lot of organizations in their ICO say, oh, these tokens are going to be used to access the network, or they have some gift card characteristic. If Google acquires this organization, then they still have the same rights. So maybe the consumer expectation in buying these tokens was maybe they thought of it as more of an equity type of thing, but I think most ICOing organizations are pretty clear that these tokens are not securities and they are used to access the network. So if Google acquires the organization and keeps on building out this network that your token can be used to access, then maybe that would be a great thing.
Okay, I have another question back here. Hi, I'm Ben. My question is, as an investor, we talked a lot about the companies and exchanges, how they can be impacted. If you take it as a given that a coin is treated as a commodity, as an investor, is there an ideal corporate structure or a way to change ownership of the coins, such as like in energy, you might use an MLP to deal with cash flows off of petroleum. Is there a way to try to reduce tax burden for a commodity?
It's a great question. I think that's like a little bit more to do with the structure of the investor than the structure of the token sale, the network itself. I think over time, I guess you'll see maybe some of the traditional LP/GP structures emerge. You're already seeing some crypto hedge funds adopting that structure for a bunch of reasons. And I think as the space matures, you're going to see people sort of converge on what structure makes the most sense.
All right, great. Thanks for all the questions.
I'm sorry, we have one last question.
One more?
He's had his hand up the whole time. And this will be the final question for the evening.
Thank you.
There was mention of a lack of guidance from the SEC. What's the panel's sense of what that guidance may look like, or even the timing of the guidance? It seems like there's a certain pickup of speed as of late.
I think that they likely won't come out with any serious type of enforcement action until something seriously bad happens. And so I think in terms of really clear, concrete guidance that can be used as precedent, that only can and will happen when people lose a lot of money and complain. That's not to say, though, that they won't continue to issue releases and notices and kind of give hints at how they're thinking about things. So depending on what that time frame looks like, maybe that never happens. Maybe all token sales are actually sales of non-securities and no one ever loses money or gets mad. But probably not. And so, yeah, I think the very clear guidance that can actually be used as precedent will happen when something bad happens.
All right, thanks for the great questions, and thanks for being a great audience. Maybe we could get a round of applause for our panel. All right, then we're going to stick around here for just a little bit more, and then we're going to head over to House of Shields. It's about 2 blocks over on New Montgomery. You go right. It's a 100-year-old bar, all classic wood, very nice. And we're going to be there soon, and make sure you sign up on the meetup.com. This video will be on the World Crypto Network soon. It'll be on YouTube, and you can just Google that if you want to watch it again, or if you're watching at home. So thanks so much.